Hi there, my name's Adam Fielding and welcome to another one of these crazy music making sessions. I hope everyone's okay in these weird and wacky times with COVID-19 and all the fun going on in the world, and I hope you're not going too stir crazy if you're stuck indoors. I'm certainly not, I'm just fine. So today I thought I would try something a bit different in Reason. Namely, I'm going to be creating a track using a combination of players and rack devices as opposed to typical sequencing, which I realise sounds like, I'm essentially just going to be letting the machine do the work. And I feel like that's a topic I might touch on later. But there's, as you'll probably see as I'm going, there's a bit more to it than that. I disagree with that notion entirely, but we'll get to that anyway. So, as you can see, I am starting with pretty much a blank slate here. It's a blank Reason document. This is pretty much how I start most of my projects now. I like working from scratch, and I have a maximizer here in the master section. It's hooked up to the master out and straight to the master hardware out. So the maximizer is literally the last thing that's getting hit in the rack. So it's just applying like a 4 dB boost to the output. Hopefully it won't be doing any actual limiting, because otherwise, it'll be too loud. But we'll see how that goes. But yes, fingers crossed. It's more of a fail-safe than anything else. So what I'm going to do today is I'm going to use a bunch of players and get the rack essentially playing itself, and then try writing something around that. I'm not entirely sure how this is going to work out. I've done it a few times before, but I've been using kind of VSTs and other stuff. I'd like to try and keep this as rack extension focused as possible, just because I feel like I like keeping things streamlined and self-contained in Reason if possible. So I feel like the best thing I could do now would be to start with, I was going to start with some drums, but actually, the first thing I should do is figure out a tempo. So I want to have something a little more lively than my usual stuff. So I'm going to go with 130 BPM today. Just a little more lively. So I'm going to create I kind of feel like I want something like a nice little sort of glitchy melodic thing to kind of start. So what I'm going to start with, right, if we're doing generative stuff, I've got a great idea for this. I am going to create, speaking of Electric Panda, I'm going to create a Nostromo spectral synthesizer instance. So here that is. Now, the cool thing about Nostromo, if you haven't used it, is it's a really, really cool device, and I think it comes with Reason Suite now. So if you have Reason Suite, you should have this, I think. Correct me if I'm wrong. But it has a randomized patch button. Now, you're probably thinking, why on earth would you want to use a random patch? That's probably going to sound like garbage. And sometimes it does, sometimes it doesn't. What I'm hoping for is something clean that I can use. So I'm just going to turn that down in the mixer, because that might be a little loud. Like I said, it's random. So probably not that. That's like a weird soundscapey thing. So someone said it doesn't come with Suite. Oh. Damn. Well, I have no idea. Oh, it comes with the synthesis rig. That's why I've got it. Yes, I picked up the latest synthesis rig, which included a lot of Electric Panda stuff, including Nostromo. It's really good. If you don't have the synthesis rig, it's well worth checking out. That's a maybe. That's a maybe. I'm probably going to turn the effects off when I'm messing around. So I've just copied the patch, so I can come back to this if I want to. I'm basically going to keep randomizing this. If I come across something that's usable, I'll probably tweak it. Nope. That's kind of nice. Right, okay. So I'm going to copy that. Might have a... There we go. Right. So it's just kind of a clean but varied sort of lead type patch. So I might just adjust the envelope so it's a little shorter. Right. Okay, so now we start messing around with players. So I want this to basically play itself. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to create a quad note generator, which someone said is Nostromo wavetable synth then. It's a Yeah, kind of. It basically uses multiple. I think it might be a granular synth. It's basically it uses multiple wavetables, I believe, and then kind of morphs between them over time. And you can control. To be honest with you, I'm not going to claim that I know exactly how it works or that I'm an expert with it, because I'm really not. I've messed around with it from like a couple of times, but it popped in my head because I remembered it had a randomized patch function. That's not to take away from it as a synth, because I think I've had some really interesting sounds come out of it. Just thought it'd be a good place to start, as opposed to me just loading a patch from somewhere else. So, I mean, that's just a random patch. That's actually quite nice. I'm a sucker for fifths, and the fact that the random patch includes the option, well, not even the option, every now and then just pops a fifth out, is quite nice, really. So anyway, I'm using the quad note generator, and what I'm going to be doing with this is I'm going to use it to trigger notes on the Nostromo, and I'm thinking of glitching those up with like an effects unit in the actual insert effects section here. So the first thing I need to do is use quad to actually trigger some notes. So I'm going to set it so that it's triggered by this sequencer, and I need to pick a scale that's going to be used throughout the track. Actually, I'll come to that in a second. Someone said spectral table, apparently. It's spectral table. Someone said, is the quad new in Reason 11? Yes. I think quad was available before Reason 11, but it's included in Reason 11 Suite, I think. I'm going to feel really stupid if I'm wrong again. So we've got the quad, we've got the Nostromo. I'm going to adjust the range. So this will be playing notes between the bass note and 1 octave up. So the bass key is C3 and it's to scale C minor. But what I'm also going to do is I'm going to run it through a scales and chords player. And just so that it locks the notes to a different scale. In fact, I could just knock the scale function off of quad, because it's going to be going through a scale and chords thing here. So it's going to generate chords based on the notes generated by quad. Someone said quad was already introduced long before Reason 11. Yes, I think it was in Reason 10, or yes, I'm sure it was Reason 10. So I'm going to pick a key that I'm going to use for this entire track. Everything's going to rely on this. So I'm going to go with G flat Lydian. Why not? That sounds fun. And so now if I start playing notes, neat. Actually, I'm just gonna right, okay. So there's that. So if I just play the sequencer now. Great, it plays the same chord over and over and over again. That's not particularly great. So I'm going to turn the rate down. I'm going to turn the rhythm rate down. I'm going to adjust the pattern so it plays a less complex pattern. And I'm going to increase the spread of the pitch. So this should... Actually, if I said that. Okay, so if I vary the pitch, increase the spread. Okay, so it's just triggering the same note over and over again. I feel like I'm doing something daft. There we go. Okay, so it's just basically playing a bunch of random chords at the moment. Great. I mean, at least it sounds vaguely musical, but it's not exactly the most exciting thing in the world. So I'm going to increase the note length so it just lets those ring out a bit longer. And I'm going to attach this to a dual arpeggio, because the more players, the better. Let's throw them all in. So now if I play this, it should just play an arp. So I'm going to vary the pattern a bit. I'm going to vary the pitch a bit more, increase the master vary on the quad, just so we have a bit more variation going on. So So it's a nice bit of variation. We've got some interesting arps going on here. I'm going to play a pattern here and start introducing some variation, and yeah. Cool. Right, so we've got like a nice little ARP thing going on here. It's quite simple. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to open up this insert section, open up the programmer, and start throwing some effects in there. So I've got an effect here called buffer pattern, and I'll show you what this does in a second. Basically, I'm using a matrix device to trigger the buffer device here, which is kind of like a stutter device. It was one of the first rack extensions I picked up actually by Pef. And it's really, really cool. So if I play now, you'll be able to hear the difference. So you get these kind of little stutters and glitches going on. In fact, I'm just going to turn the gate off because I don't really need that. I'm also going to turn the release down on the synth, so it's just... So I'm getting the impression that this is probably going to be like an extra, more melodic element rather than the main thing in the track. So I'm thinking if I add a bit of delay and a bit of reverb, we will get something interesting. It will kind of just help to smush it a bit. So I'm going to create an instance of the echo and hook that up to the output of this effects combinator, like so. And turn the mix down. Change the time to 316, that's great. I'm going to set ping pong on. I'm going to turn the feedback up. I'm going to use a filter, and let's see how that sounds. Actually, contrary to what I said earlier, I think I'm going to get rid of that sort of fifth effect. In fact, I'm not entirely sold on that patch. I'm going to copy it just in case I decide to go back to it. No. It's a little too sweet, I think. That's a little too crazy. Someone said, is the stutter effect on buffer random, or can it be set to musical rhythms? Yes, it can be manually triggered with MIDI input. That's basically what this matrix device is doing. So if we flip the rack around, the note CV and gate CV are hooked up to the buffer device here. So that is controlling what the buffer is doing. If you were to create a separate track for it, you could control it using any MIDI input or the sequencer. So yeah, that's basically, I'm using this as an automatic buffer device. So I will come across a patch I like. That's a bit too crazy. I feel like some of these would be great in another context, but I just want something simple. I think I'm overthinking this, and I think I just need to add lots of reverb. So I'm just going to add some reverb, and let's see how that comes out. So I'm going to turn the time up here. I'm using the DR1 as always, and someone just said, some of these random patches are definitely worth saving. Yeah, I probably should. In fact, what I should do is just have a session of just randomizing patches and saving the good ones. I'm not going to do that now, but I should, because I've had some awesome stuff in the past, and yeah. Ooh, I like that. It's chaotic, but not too chaotic. I like that. I think what I need to do is just crack on and start making some other stuff, and then I'm going to adjust this if it doesn't fit in the context of what I'm doing. So, right. So, I feel like I've dicked around with that for long enough. I'm going to create some drums. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create an instance of redrum, which is right there. Just stick that in its own separate column just to keep things simple. And I'm just going to open up the program here. I have a sort of standard insert section that I use for drums nowadays, which consists of a pulverizer. In fact, I might turn that down a little bit. The Eve MP5 by Kruasa, which I really like, just to kind of give a bit of a bump around the 12K mark. And that's pretty much all it does. It sort of attenuates it around 20K as well, just to kind of smooth off the highs a bit, which I think sounds really nice. And it goes through a limiter at the end. It might seem a bit strange to be putting the drums on their own through a limiter. It certainly wasn't standard practice for me up until a couple of years ago, when I realized it made more sense to put individual elements of the mix through a limiter rather than smashing the entire mix at the end to try and fit it into what dynamic space, well, what headroom was available rather. So yes, that's what I've done basically. So what I'm going to do before I start messing around with that is turn down the redrum, because that might get a little loud once I start messing around with that. Oh, I'm really not used to using one monitor now. Right, so I'm just gonna load up a couple of hits. Someone said Nostromo is one of the few synths I don't have. Do you recommend it over other Spectrum table synths? It's its own thing. I've certainly never really used any other synth quite like it. So I'd say give it a try, and it's definitely worth trying. Just it's great for messing around in. I need to spend more time with it, to be honest. So I'm going to go into my trusty Evolve Free folder. This is a drum bank called Evolve Free by Wave Alchemy. You can get it for free on their website, hence the name. It's basically individual samples from their Drumvolution sound bank and VST instrument, and everything sounds great. So I'm just going to have a look at the kicks and see. Quite like the sound of that one, so I'm just going to go with that. I'm just going to start with a kick and a snare. So if I have a snare, I want something short. Actually, that's pretty much exactly what I wanted. So just kind of a short. It's a little loud, so I'm just going to turn it down. In fact, the entire thing's quite loud, so I'm just going to turn it down as well. Again, I'm mixing on headphones, so the mix is probably not going to sound fantastic at the end. Oh, thanks. Yeah, I have a decent amount of synths I need to spend more time with for sure. I know that feeling, very much so. Every time a good deal comes along, I think, I could pick that up. But yeah, it's better to spend more time with what you've got. So now I'm going to start messing around with beat map, so we can get some drums going. So I'm just going to spawn XY. That will give me some random values for the XY value on the beat map, which determines the pattern that's played essentially. I'm going to turn the density of the snare down a bit, keep the kick there so it's something kind of steady, excuse me. Dr. Dre smashes all his drums through a Waves L2 limiter before hitting the master channel. He's openly admitted it's his secret source. Interesting. Yeah, so I'm just going to play this. The thing is, every time I mess around with players like this, I always seem to end up with something that sounds like it belongs. It's like an early noughties IDM track. And I get the impression this isn't going to be any exception. So if you don't like early noughties IDM, abandon ship, I guess, because I'm probably going to jump into that with aplomb. So yeah, so I think I'm going to add a hat as well. Just something short. In fact, I might just adjust the length of that. It's a nice snappy hat. That's interesting. I'm just gonna play around with this. Someone said Warp Records are listening now. So just by messing around with the beat map a little bit, I've come up with a completely different pattern, and I'm going to show you something interesting that will help to kind of keep things varied as the track goes. So I'm kind of thinking about how this track's going to develop. Bear in mind, I haven't actually sequenced anything yet. This is just blank. So I'm going to... Someone said... Oh, it's Giles. Hi, Giles. Adam, have you explored using Pulsar to control... That's exactly what I'm about to do. Thank you, Giles. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to combine these. I'll show you why in a second. And I'm going to create a instance of Pulsar. And Pulsar's awesome for modulating CV values, and I'm going to use it in an interesting way here. Now, what I typically do is just output the CV outputs from Pulsar into the beatmap XY inputs, but I kind of like to be able to see what's going on, and I think it'd be interesting to kind of show off here. So I'm going to have the output from LFO1 going to CV in 1 on this combinator, and 2 to 2 on the combinator. And I'm going to set the beat map CV input 1 to X position and CV input 2 to the Y position. And it's lost my pattern because I can't remember what it was. I think the X was around 10-ish. So I'm going to go set that to around between 9.5 and 11.5 on the X axis. So it kind of hovers around there. And the Y position to it was around 0-ish, so I'm going to go between 0 and 1, and I haven't got LFO2 turned on yet, so I'm going to turn that on, and you can see it kind of visualizes there, and it's running way too quick, so I'm going to tempo sync that and turn that down. You can kind of see it shifting around there. I'm going to turn the level up a bit. And what I'm going to do on this combinator, the reason I mean, it's cool that you can see what it's doing here, but that's not why I put it in a combinator, although it is kind of cool, and I sort of feel like that is totally justified. So the beat map, I'm going to assign rotary 1 to, oh no, I'm going to go to the pulsar and assign rotary 1 to LFO1 level and rotary 1 to LFO2 level. So now I can control how much that's drifting around by just adjusting that one knob on this combinator. So that controls how much it's moving around. It's controlling the level on both of these LFOs on the pulsar by just that one knob. So I'm just going to call that vary. And I'm going to get rid of the other names on the combinator because I'm a stickler for those kind of things. And I'm going to call this drums. So I'm just going to play it now, and I'm going to increase the variation as, actually I'm going to call it variation. I'm going to call it vary. I'm going to increase the variation as I'm playing it. And you should hear the drum pattern vary as I do so. It's not varying enough for my taste, so I'm going to increase these values. Turn the rate down. So it's varying the drums kind of nicely, nice and subtly. So that's nice, that's nice. And if I want it to be steady, I can just turn the variation down and it will just play the same bar over and over again with some slight variation. So that's cool. So yeah, beatmap is great. I really, really, really highly recommend trying it out. And I haven't even used the mirrors and the percussion yet, and I'm totally going to use the percussion now. So actually I'm going to set up a mirror for the kick. So I'm just going to create a... I'm going to... Someone said, this is awesome, but how would you control that in a full track sequence? I will get to that. Yeah, that will be my next thing. My intention now is to basically create a sort of semi-fleshed out pattern that I can use. It's basically the logical extreme of blocks. except instead of using blocks to create a sequence in the sequencer, I'm letting the rack play itself. Once I've got the rack playing something I'm happy with, then I'm going to try and arrange that into a full track with interesting results, I hope. So I'm just going to create a quiet kick here. Oops. And increase the mirror value here on the kick. So we'll see how that goes. And just play. Ah, it's there. Right. I forgot that's, yeah. So now it's mirroring the kick with this extra little sort of percussive kick there as well. So unfortunately the hat's mirrored there, so I'm going to set that to E1. And so I'm going to have an extra sort of hat alongside the regular hat. So I'm going to decrease the compression on the pulverizer. It's a bit much at the moment. So if I want to get rid of that extra mirrored hat, I can just turn that down. And for the question of how I'm going to control that in a full track sequence, you can just, if you press Alt and click on it, you can just automate that and start drawing in automation in the sequencer. So I am going to have to use the sequencer eventually. Someone's asked, how do you feel of redrum versus Korg drummer? Do you mean Kong drummer? Because I haven't used the any Korg drummer, but Kong is, I like Kong, but I don't know, something about it just doesn't really click with me. I always used it more as an effects unit than an actual drum device, and that's nothing to do with it. I'm just very comfortable using the redrum, and I can't really explain why, to the point where I will bounce stuff out of VSTs just so I can throw them into the redrum, because I just like it. I like how straightforward it is. So actually I'm just going to clear that automation. So I'm going to introduce mirrored snare. So I'm just going to go into this percussion folder here, and that'll do. Actually, I'm going to use a clap for the snare mirror. Oh, I don't want the yeah. Right, snare mirror. There we go. Right. I think what I'm going to do is just set to shout out to using Kong for tape delay before we got the echo. Yeah, I totally did that. Yeah, Kong's got some great effects on it, and I used to use the tape delay on Kong all the time. One of the things that kind of annoyed me about it was the fact you couldn't collapse the main pad section. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to stick that clap on. Actually, I'm going to change this to E1. I'm going to change that to F1. Actually, no, I'm not. No. Wait, I'm going to change this to G1 and change this to F1. Oh, what am I doing? Right. Right, okay, so, okay. So I'm just going to change this to like a little percussive pop. So I'm going to go to percussion and that'll do. And I'm going to add some extra percussion here. So let's have something kind of abstract. That sounds good. Ooh. Actually, that would be great there. That's cool. That's kind of abstract and odd. well, this is sounding odd. I'm going to save it just in case everything crashes. So this is kind of a good example of sort of the weird stuff you can get when you start using players. This is absolutely not the kind of thing I would have written normally if I hadn't been using players. And it's kind of an interesting base for things to go. So I'm using a random patch and essentially kind of a nice generative drum beat over the top, semi-generative, and everything I'm using is in the rack. Like there's nothing going on in the sequencer. So I'm going to bump the tempo a little bit. There we go. So everything's assigned in the beat map. Now, what I might do later in the track is start introducing extra kind of open hats over the top, just to kind of give a bit of a sense of progression as the track's going on. That's something I'll come to later. So I guess we should probably introduce something a little more melodic and bassy going on, because we've got this weird sort of key thing going on, and it's nothing particularly structured at all. So I am going to create a combinator, because I'm thinking it might be a good idea to start combining stuff. So I'm just going to call this melody, and I'm going to create a line mixer so that anything I put in here I can create a submix for and have that coming out of the combinator. So I'm just going to dip in here, and I'm thinking like a pad will inform where I go with the bass. So I'm going to go into my custom folder of patches and go into my patch library and see if we can find a good looking pad. So this is my folder of custom patches, all whacked in one gigantic folder. So the PD section is for pads. So what sounds good? Saturated pad sounds interesting. Let's have a look at that. Oh, it's Expanse. I haven't used Expanse in ages. So I'm just going to turn that down just in case it's incredibly loud compared to everything else. Ooh, that's nice. So yeah, that'll do. Yeah, wow. That was a good pick. So what I'm thinking of doing is controlling that with something like a matrix. So I was just playing a little pattern here. Someone said, "Are these all your own creations?" Yes, this is my own pad. I made in Expanse. To be honest, I haven't done a lot of programming in Expanse, so this was kind of a lucky find. I'm sure I've used that in one of my tracks somewhere, but I don't know where. Yeah, I really need to use Expanse more. I think I made this patch before Europa was a thing. The thing is, if I think of using a wavetable synth now for pads, I tend to go with Europa, but they both have very, very different flavors, as evidenced by the fact this doesn't sound even remotely Europa-y. So, quick shout out to Magic Rock in Huddersfield, who made this lovely beer. I'm not sponsored by them, I just happen to think it's really nice. Yeah, it's a little brewery in Huddersfield. Yeah, ooh, that's pretty strong, so I'm going to be steaming at the end of this. So I'm thinking of controlling this with a matrix device. So I was playing octaves then, so that's F1, F2. So I want it to play 2 octaves at once, so I'm going to totally cheat and just duplicate that device, which is incredibly inefficient, but hey ho. So I've got 2 devices here now, so if I play a single note, actually I'm going to have to go here first. I'm going to transpose one of them down an octave, so if I play a single note, I get nice octaves. In fact, no, I'm going to transpose the other one up an octave, because that's a bit low, so I'm going to roll off the subs, so about 80 hertz, just because I want to give the kick a bit of space. Oh, handy, I was recording that. Cool, yeah, that works. Someone said, I'm looking to make music for TV and commercials, and I was wondering if you think Reason is capable of doing this. Also, what genre would you recommend for doing this as well? I can't really speak for the latter question. That depends entirely on who you want to work with. But I can answer the former question with a definitive, absolutely 100% yes. Most of my work is 100% Reason. I actually had an interesting discussion about this on Reason Talk recently. I have a couple of kind of fringe cases where I won't use Reason exclusively for what I'm doing. One of those being, if I'm mastering an entire project, I'll do that in Studio One, because the project view in Studio One it's designed for that, and it's fantastic. And if I'm recording hardware jams, I won't be using Reason, although I might be using Reason for mixing them. I won't use Reason because, there we go, it's hardware. And there was a third fringe case. Oh yeah, if I'm collaborating with other people who aren't using Reason, then my hands are kind of tied. I have to use whatever we're all using. Someone said, on our secret destinations on Mesmer, there's a lead guitar sound right from the outset that has a beautiful reverse delay on it. I'd love to know how that was achieved. Is it just bounced to audio and reversed, or is there a fancy plug-in chain? I'm trying to remember how that goes now. That was it's a simple, clean guitar effects chain, and I'm using Kilohertz Reverser. Yes, it's just Kilohertz Reverser. It's a fantastic plugin. It's part of their snap-in library, and you can get it as a rack extension in Reason. I use Reverser all the time. It's great. Check it out. I knew I'd get a plugin I knew I'd be able to plug Kilohertz's stuff at some point during this. So I feel like I need to start like a streaming bingo every time I plug this or do this, yeah. Every time I go nuts with a reverb, I'll be hammered by the end of it. Actually, that's bingo, not a drinking game. Right, so I digress. I'm going to create a matrix device, and I'm going to use that to sequence this combinator, which is handily hooked up. So I'm just going to take this sequence here. So it's A sharp, F, G sharp, D sharp. Right. So it's A sharp 2. So I'm just going to A sharp 2. If I turn the resolution right down. How long does that last? Oh, that's an octave too high. In fact, I might transpose that down in that case. I just can't decide whether I want to transpose up or down. And then F. And then G sharp. I mean, there's no particular reason for me doing this using the matrix rather than the sequencer, other than I just want to keep everything in the rack for now because I'm weird. So that was A sharp, F. Oh, cool. Right. A sharp, F, F sharp, and C sharp. Cool. Right. Okay. So that will happily play itself, and this might actually feed nicely into what I'm planning on doing next. So I'm just going to turn the step count up, and someone said going nuts with the reverb is the default, methinks, and the Matrix is a really inspiring and fun device. It is. I really like the Matrix. It's been there since Reason 1, and it's great that I'm still getting use out of it. And speaking of going nuts with the reverb, I think it's time to add a bit of reverb to this here pad. I'm not going to go nuts with it because I kind of like how clean and deep it is. So I'm just going to have a touch of that, but I'm going to crank up the time. So I'm going to get rid of that sequencer lane now because I'm not using it. So that's sounding kind of delightfully bonkers and moody. So that's good. I feel like that describes my personality at the moment. So let's run with that. Right. So we've got this pad. I feel like I could do with some extra percussion, but right, I've got an idea. I'm going to go into my patch library here, go to devices, and I'm going to create an instance of Roidos, which is a reactor ensemble basically designed for glitchy drums by an awesome outfit called Blink Sonic. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to create I'm just going to create a loop and then use that as a basis for creating some more weird generative stuff. Hopefully this will make sense as I'm doing it. I've got this idea in my head and we'll see where it goes. So I'm just going to play. So this is Roidos here. There is a free version of this which you can get through the Reactor user library, and I heartily recommend checking it out. I've used it in previous streams to create glitchy drums. Unlike the original version of Roidos, I haven't modified this ensemble, so it's just using samples from the actual bank as it comes. And I'm hoping to tweak that. So I'm going to play this and go through the presets and then mess with them until I get something I like. I think what I'm going to do... Someone said, if you wanted the same result as you're getting from Roidos without leaving the reason rack, what would you opt for? Essentially what I'm doing here is I'm using Roidos as kind of a weird, granular, random percussion generator thing. I've used something similar in the past, which was I basically used the NN90 and hooked that up to a Matrix device to trigger random percussive blips. So that would work. If you wanted to introduce weird granular effects, Paul Ortiz, he does amazing Reason tutorials and is an excellent musician generally. He did a really interesting tutorial on using grain as a percussive device and hooking it up to a redrum. Check that out. That might be what you're looking for. It's really interesting. And if nothing else, it might inspire some new ideas. Definitely check that out. And his videos are excellent. So yeah, so basically, I'm not sold on what I'm getting here. He says, and then that's pretty much exactly what I wanted, just little pops. So if I just solo that channel, so you would just bounce Roidos to capture the audio to use in the track. I'm going to do something a little more involved, but that's what I'm going to be doing next. So I'm just gonna bounce just a couple of bars. I think that'll be enough. And I'm going to increase the range, and I would like a bit more variation there. that sounds like that sounds crazier, but I think I'm going to get more out of that. So I'm just going to bounce that in place, and then I'm going to get rid of this instance of reactor and just mess around with that as it is. So forget you saw a reactor. There was a sound source, and now it's gone. So I'm going to normalize that, and I'm going to turn it down massively because that's going to be super loud. Turn on the high pass filter, and so great. So we've got 2 bars of noise, and that's it. So now I'm going to use something else. So I'm going to double click on it, and it's automatically created slice points where the transients are, as it should do. So now I'm going to bounce that to a Rex loop, and I'm going to create a instance of Dr. Octorex and open that loop in Dr. Octorex. So if I go to song samples, unassigned samples, there it is. Cool. Now I'm going to get rid of that bounced audio track because I don't need that anymore. And if I play this, it should just play those 2 bars over and over again. Ooh, that's loud. Let's not do that. So that's great. It's playing a bunch of random stuff. So now if I enable loop playback, I'm going to do something a little unorthodox here, and use a quad note generator to trigger this loop. So I'm going to set the bass key to C1, which I believe is the first slice. No, that just played. No, that's not how it works. Is it C2? Oh, what am I doing? Right. Oh, we'll see one. Okay, so I'm going to increase the pitch variation, change the range from 0 to, how many slices are there? So if I copy that to track, I should be able to see how many slices there are if I stick it in another sequencer lane. So there's about 2 octaves worth of slices. So actually, I'm going to set that to 0 and 12, increase the pitch variance, and change the rate to 132, and play it. So it's triggering that original Roydos loop, but there's loads of variation going on with the quad note generator, so I'm going to vary that up. I think I may have gone a little overboard with this. Right. So it's just like these little extra percussive flourishes. And that's being controlled entirely using the quad. So actually I might increase the range. 24, increase the spread. We'll get more of those slices playing. So that's cool. So I've got this quad note generator is now basically a percussion device. So you might be thinking, why on earth did I use the quad note generator instead of something like the drum sequencer, which is designed for this kind of thing? And that's because I just wanted the unpredictability of the quad note generator. I thought it'd be interesting to play with, and I quite like how it turned out. So yeah. Now I'm going to start giving these track names sensible names. So this will be Glitchy keys. That's Glitchy perk. Let's see how many things. Not Glitchy perv. And that'll be pad for now. So cool. So that'll just keep playing over and over and over again, and don't have to do anything with it. And I'm going to go to song self-contained settings, and in fact I'm going to contain everything here. So if next time I save this, it'll all be self-contained. No worries about losing all this stuff. So I'm not going to create an acid bass line, but I do want to create something a bit crazier. So I'm going to create a line mixer here inside the same combinator, because I want the bass to be triggered by the same matrix device here, but I want the matrix device to trigger a series of players. So I'm going to create a mix channel here, and this will be the bass channel. And what synth? I've been using ever since I picked up the synthetic Rig 3, I have been using Respire quite a lot. So I'm going to use that here. But a caveat about Respire. Someone said Reason electric bass. Damn. I'm not entirely convinced that would have suited this track. But no, I'm using the Respire. Now, I really like the sound of Spire. It sounds fantastic. But the rack extension version, I think, is a bit of a pain to program. That's an understatement and a half. So I'm going to start with a preset and just go from there, basically, because oh great, and it's not even opening in the rack extension folder. So I'm going to go to rack extensions and how's it called? Spire or Respire? Respire. Now I'm going to turn it down in the mixer as well, because another thing I'm not hugely fond of in Respire is the fact that a lot of the patches... Oh, that's right, I'm going to need to create... I need to hook that up to that channel for a start. That's alright, but I want something a bit more punchy, I think. So, you know... It's not quite. Oh, that's what I want. Right. So now if I press play, it will just play a single bass note. Someone said Reason electric bass for turning this into a square pusher track. Damn it! I really wish I thought of that. Unfortunately, there isn't a Reason player for crazy virtuosic bass noodling, because otherwise I would be throwing that on everything. Yeah. Speaking of which, I still need to check out his latest album. I've listened to a couple of tracks and I really liked what I heard. It's been a while since I got into a square pusher track like that. So anyway, I'm going to create a track for this, just so I'm not triggering the pad at the same time as I'm auditioning this. So I'm gonna adjust the sustain and decay, so it's snappier. Someone said works with the Warp Records theme. Indeed it does. Right, so what I'm going to do now is I'm going to go back to the chord note generator, and I'm going to set it to F sharp Lydian, which I believe is the key that I selected for that weird, yes, G flat Lydian. There we go. So I'm just going to run it and see what happens. Someone said the rack plugin just rips the sequencer out. Basically, it does. It also means you can't use VST plugins inside the rack, which is a shame, I feel, because I use VST plugins all the time in Reason now. I understand, not wanting to have VST plugins inside a VST host, which also hosts VST plugins. But I would have liked to have seen it, but there we go. I'm just going to turn the pattern up because the higher patterns tend to be busier, and I want something busy, so too busy. I mean, that's kind of funny, but not really what I'm after. I'm thinking. If I adjust the note length, I reckon I could get a good glide with this. So I'm going to adjust the playback mode to mode 2 in Respire, which I believe introduces portamento. I'm going to solo that so we can hear what I'm doing. Actually, I'm going to change the bass. I'm going to change the range up. That sounds delightfully odd, right? I get the impression I'm not going to be using this as the actual bass because it's just a little too crazy at the moment, but what I'm probably going to do is just use it as like an extra melodic touch and have like a droning bass. I think that would work nicely. Also, I've just realised there's one thing I haven't touched on, and that is the fact that I'm not using any aux sends, which I used to use all the time. There is a good reason for that. I've basically switched to using mostly insert effects rather than aux send effects because it makes it easier to bounce stems. It just makes it so much easier when you're organising a track. And yeah, I still use aux sends, but only I don't tend to have like a reverb aux send and a delay aux send nowadays. I just have certain reverbs and delays I tend to use. My go-tos nowadays are Valhalla delay, which sounds fantastic, and the DR1, which is awesome. I also use what's it called? A Black Hole by Eventide. My mind went blank for a second. Yeah, Eventide, and that's awesome. I really like it. It's great for big spacey reverbs that don't completely kill your mix. So for clean guitars, it's fantastic. Adjust the note length a bit. This is sounding quite daft. No, it needs those deeper notes, I think. I'm gonna try changing the waveform here. Not an RV7000 fan then. I still use the RV7000 from time to time. Not so much nowadays. I do still use it for convolution reverb, but I find that the DR1 handles pretty much everything I throw at it with, it just sounds great. So that's pretty much become my go-to. And I still really like the Echo, but unfortunately Valhalla delay kind of does what it does, but way better. So, but that's like not taking away from either of those devices. I just prefer the alternatives that are now available. But I do still really like the RV7000. It does hold a special place in my heart, and it's great that I still use it after it was introduced in like 2003. Poly versus Comet is the only VST I use. A recommendation from one reverb addict to another. Oh, that's a good suggestion. I'll have to check that out. In fact, I'm going to make a note of that before I forget. Polyverse Comet. Nice, thank you. So we've got this weird bass thing going on. I don't want to overcomplicate that because actually I'm going to turn up the master vary. I say I don't want to overcomplicate it and crank up the variation knob because that's how I roll. I'm going to change the bass key to A sharp 2 actually because that's the root note, well the start note of the pads is A sharp. So I'm going to... Actually, if I... No, that's messing with it. Yeah, that's better. I forgot that I was still... hey, I still like my PCM 70s and they were introduced in 1985. Well, I mean, it's a completely subjective thing. I think everyone has their own preferred, lovable devices. And I certainly have my pick. And yeah, I still use the ECF42 filter. Is it ECF42? I feel like I'm going crazy now. Is it? It is ECF42. I don't know why I doubted myself. The ECF42, which was introduced in Reason 1, and it's great for simple filtering. One thing I like about it is that it's not completely transparent, but it's very close. So, yeah. So I like that bass, but it's a bit too crazy to be used as kind of an actual bass. So I'm gonna create another line mixer in this here combinator. So I'm gonna be controlling 3 separate instruments using this one combinator playing. One instrument is playing octaves, one is playing this weird sequenced bass line, and the other one's just going to be playing steady notes on old faithful Poly 6. Speaking of devices that we love, I do love the Poly 6, and it just wouldn't be right to not use it here. So I've just lowered the cutoff here. This is kind of my go-to setup. I'll set the cutoff to 12 o'clock, the envelope intensity to 12 o'clock on the filter, and that should sound kind of... No, that's the wrong thing. So if I create a track for it, it's silent because I haven't hooked it up to a mix channel yet. So that's great, but it needs to be an octave lower. And it's going to need to be an octave lower than that as well. So I'm going to go to the combinator and transpose that down 1 octave. So that's great. I'm going to set that to a PWM waveform and mess with this. Again, this is kind of my go-to setting. And reduce the release. So yeah, so I don't like how that's cutting off the last note. So I'm just going to change this so that all of these devices are monophonic because they're only playing 1 note at a time anyway. So the voice count there is 1. The voice count on here is now 1. And I'm going to change the voice count here to 1 as well. So actually, no, yeah, so now I can just have those sustained all the time. Great. Now I feel like the kick is kind of interfering with that bass drone a bit. I mean, I could be wrong. I'm just going to call that bass drone. I'm going to call this wacky bass. And I feel like it started off particularly wacky then when I came back to it. That's strange. So I want to sidechain that bass drone with the kick, and obviously kind of a simple pump isn't going to work because it's not a 4 on the floor kick. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to create an instance of the Spider audio merger and splitter. I don't want to mess with the sound of the drums because I kind of like it. It's simple and it's not too complicated. So I'm going to take the stereo out from here, and that's going to be the merge output on this Spider. The stereo out is going to go into this merge section here. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to take the kick, which is channel 1, put that in the split section, and merge that with the rest of the output. So this should sound exactly the same. If I remove the kick now, I've taken the kick out. So I can now split that kick into the dynamics input of this bass drone. So now if I turn on the compressor on the SSL mixer here and play it, so it's being massively sidechained with the kick. And I think with the other crazy bass that's going on, I think that works. So obviously that's quite extreme. Again, nothing going on in the sequencer yet, which I think is kind of hilarious. So when it comes to actually arranging this is going to be interesting. So I think I might add a little reverb to that glitchy percussion just because I think it could do with it. And I want to add a little variation to that pad in a second as well. Oh, that's too much. Just a little bit there. Someone said, don't you find the attack on the SSL isn't fast enough, especially when looking for that sidechain duck effect? No, I think it works. I don't have a problem with it. I mean, you can always use the fast attack. That does the job. I mean, if I was doing simple pumping, which I might do at some point. In fact, I'm going to do it here on this wacky melody. I would use something like the pump sidechain gate effect, which is also in the synthesis rig. So I'm going to turn the rate down because otherwise it will be a bit much. I'm going to bring the floor up so it's not too drastic of an effect. So if I wanted something, you know, more straightforward, like using more as a creative effect, I'd use that, and you can adjust it more easily using the controls on pump here. But you know, I think the SSL works for that, and I think it's working here. I mean, your definition of work may vary. So that's going to come in super useful when I want to add variations when I'm actually building the track out, and hopefully building the track out isn't going to take too long because I've done most of the work here. So one other thing I want to do is I want to add some variation to the pad, I think. So I'm going to create an aux send, and it's going to be based on an effect that I have here called neutron fifths, which I've used before. And it's an instance of neutron that goes through a DR1 that transposes everything up by 7 semitones. I'm actually going to go for an octave this time because I think that'll work better. And that's set up to aux send 1. So I'm going to have the pad go through there and just crank that up. And so it adds an extra octave on top of what's going on. So if I were to adjust the pitch, you should be able to hear that. So what I can do now is I can automate that aux send to add an extra layer on top of the pad, which is kind of nice. I do, however, want to filter out the lows on that. So I'm going to use something that was introduced in Reason 11, which is the channel EQ. And it's basically the SSL EQ, but in rack format. And I'm going to take the output from the device, from that aux send, route it through there and back out again, and set the high pass filter there. So I'm going to crank that up a bit. So it's just going to roll off those lows. So something I'm going to want to do later in the track is add some extra hats or cymbals or something. I did mention this earlier, and I'm going to do that now. And I'm going to use the drum sequencer. So I'm going to use that on that channel, which is, oh, that's handy, channel 8. So I'm going to just have a cymbal ride. Okay, I think I'm just going to go for an open hat because I think those are a bit much. So hi-hats. That'll do, I think. Okay, I got that wrong. So I've been triggering the wrong thing this entire time. Fantastic. So I'm going to change that to G#1 and add some extra percussion here. So I'm going to have a tom. Why not? I quite like that one. Just... someone's asked, how does Reason compare to a physical CV rack? Honestly, I wouldn't know. I've never used one. I've never messed around with modular gear. I've only ever messed around with self-contained synths. Which is interesting because you would think that something like a modular environment would appeal to me, but I'm very much an in-the-box kind of guy. I prefer working with software. I much prefer the convenience of it. And any hardware that I'm using now it needs to be integrated to be easy to use in my software environment. It actually took me a long time to figure that out because I was of the mindset that hardware is always better. And that's not the case. So it depends entirely on what you're comfortable with. And in my case, it just happens to be that I'm comfortable working entirely with software and bringing in hardware elements so long as they integrate with the environment that I'm most comfortable with. But people have written fantastic stuff using hardware, and I'm not saying that one is better than the other because that is patently false. And I still do hardware jams, and I have collaborative projects that involve hardware. So Neffel is a good example of that. I have a couple of albums, a few albums now released. It's part of a collaborative project called Neffel, which is entirely hardware based, and it's awesome. And it's just nice to mess around in a different environment. But for day-to-day work, I much prefer software. But I have no idea how it compares to a physical CV rack because I've never used one outside of just messing around at university and that kind of thing. So actually, I think I'm just going to have that on just steady every 4 beats. And of course, I got rid of the hat. Ooh. Ooh. No, not having a shaker. I don't know why I got so excited for that. I'm going to have that offbeat, actually. So that's great. It's quite steady, but what I'm going to do now is just a probability of each hit. So I'm pretty much always... Actually, no. I'm going to have about 75% probability on 80% on the first hit, 65 on the second one, 80 again on the third, and 50 on the fourth. So some of them will drop out. So it's just introducing extra variety. So if I were to leave this running for 2 hours, I can pretty much guarantee that no 4 bars would be the same as the previous 4 bars. I'm going to adjust the probability because I think I may have nerfed it a bit too much, so just bump them up by about 10%. It's the problem when you start playing with probability. You're at the whims of whatever the computer decides works. So also bear in mind, I've only got 6 instruments going on here. Well, 6 channels. I think I've got a reasonable mix going on, which is unlike my usual way of working where I would be chucking stuff constantly in. It's just interesting how these things work out when you're focusing on one particular environment at a time. So... So I can just automate whether that's on or off. And it will just bring in the hats whenever I fancy. There is a lot more to drum sequencer than I'm showing off here. I'm just using it to trigger those open hats. I feel like I'm doing it a bit of a disservice by doing that here. But definitely dive into that. Before beat map and quad were a thing, I was using drum sequencer I was using the probability triggers to trigger melodic sequences and that kind of thing. So it's not just for drums, in much the same way that quad isn't just for melodic elements. I'm using it for the drums here as well. I could have used the drum sequencer here, which is kind of what it's designed for, but I'm weird and I fancy a change. So... So yeah, someone's just pointed out, it sounds great, Adam, thank you. And still nothing in the sequencer. Yeah, nothing going on. I just instinctively switched to the sequencer to show off what was going on in the song, and there's nothing there. So all of these note lanes are completely pointless at the moment. In fact, you know, just to prove a point, I'm not going to delete the tracks because I might need those when I'm automating stuff, but you get the idea. So, right, I feel like I should stop messing around and actually sequence this. So, what am I going to start with? What am I going to start with? I feel like that wacky... I feel like that's a weird way to start. So I'm going to go with that. So, the first things first, I am going to automate the pattern here and have that disabled, so it won't be playing those three instruments. It won't be playing any of the bass, it won't be playing the pad at the start. So if I play it now... Okay, well, something's gone awry there. Oh, because the quad is playing... Okay. Someone said, you could actually bounce it like that. Don't tempt me. I'll just set it to 5 minutes and just bounce that and be done. Now, I'd like to have some vague semblance of structure. I feel like what I'm going to do is just automate that so it's off as well. I don't know why that's... Well, I do know why it's triggering because that's sort of what it should be doing, but... I'm going to do the same with those hats. In fact, I'm just going to keep that off for the start. So it all kicks in when that... Oops, trying to hit the microphone. It all kicks in once those automation lanes... Once it goes past the... So, there we go. I need to remember that I'm working in 8-bar chunks. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to create a block here, just as a guideline, so I can see where those 8-bar sections are and automate things to come in and out during those times, in terms of the melody at least. So... So, at the start of the song, I think I'm going to have the snare not playing. So I'm just automating the density on the snare. And I also don't want the mirror on the kick. So that's going to come down. And I don't want the hats or the mirror on the hats either. So basically, I'm just killing everything. Someone's asked an interesting question. I'm an almost complete newbie at synthesis. I've used Ableton and a bunch of free synths such as Modulating. I was wondering how purely additive and subtractive synthesis compares to FM synthesis when it comes to sound, quality, shape, etc. Apples and oranges. They're all completely different and it depends entirely on the sound you're after. I wouldn't say one synthesis type is better than the other. I would say that if you're just getting started, I would start with subtractive synthesis because you can apply the same principles and techniques to most other forms of synthesis, or a lot of the same principles, not all of them. Obviously, FM synthesis is completely different in terms of sound generation and modulation, that kind of thing. But yes, someone's already said, start with the building blocks of subtractive. Absolutely, I would 100% recommend that. In fact, if you're using Reason, I would recommend just messing around with Subtractor. It's an old synth, but you can get some really interesting sounds out of it, and it's so cleanly laid out that it's just great. You won't overwhelm yourself, and it's a great way to just mess around and learn. And from there, you can mess around with things like Thor, and then branch out and apply those same principles to Maelstrom, which is a completely different synth, but still has things like envelopes and modulators, and it doesn't have LFOs in the traditional sense, but they work in essentially the same way, the modulators, and a filter section. So yeah, I'd say start with subtractive synths. So what I'm doing here is I'm essentially just setting everything to 0 at the start. And I'm going to do the same with the perk layer as well. So all to 0. I feel like just having that that kick. Someone said, oh, that's why it's called Subtractor. Yep. Also, if you've never seen this, I'm sure a few people have, but here we go. If I fire up the Subtractor, you can... Oh no, you can't. Oh yes, you can. Oh, I was worried then. You can take the screws out, and that's fun. I'm very easily amused. There are actually a bunch of those Easter eggs in Reason 1, and they were taken out of Reason 2 onwards. I'm not sure why, but there we go. So I'm going to filter in the glitchy percussion, and I'm going to have that come in over 2 measures. I'm going to copy that there. All of that. I might start bringing in the snare during the second measure as well. So now handily, there's a dry wet knob on this weird buffer effect that I created. So I'm going to use that so I can have it completely dry at the start of the track, and then bring in those glitchy effects during the second half of that measure. Actually, I want the snares to come in a bit more there. There we go. So what I'm probably going to start doing now is filtering in the pad. I might bring in that droney bass in the next section as well and filter in the pad and go from there. So I'm basically doing it in chunks. The blocks aren't serving any purpose besides as a visual aid for each measure. In fact, what I'm going to do is with the glitchy keys, I'm going to automate this reverb so it starts a bit more washed out and drops down. That's kind of a favorite trick of mine, and adjust the curve so it drops more quickly, and do that. And have the high pass filter in as well. I'm going to set that to insert pre, so the high pass filter kicks in on the reverb as well, which is an insert effect. So I do that, put that there, and have that drop in like that. It's a bit much. So I might vary the kick a little bit in the second half of that measure. And I might bring the hats in here. So if I just halve that and have them come in a little bit there. So another thing I might do is I might have a big aux send reverb coming on the drums. So I'm going to create an aux send reverb for this particular instance. So I'm just going to crank that up, turn the low cut right up, and I'm just going to trigger that on at the end of this measure. So or not. Oh wait, I've automated the wrong thing. So clear that. I want number 2. Right. So there we go. So now we get that nice wash of reverb over the kick. It kind of gives you an idea that something's gonna kick in, and it will. start introducing a bit of variety here. And those hats are in. So I'm not going to have the crazy bass coming in just yet, but I am going to have the pad and that bass drone come in. So I'm going to filter the pad in using the low pass filter on the SSL. I'm going to automate that so it comes in. I'm going to have that come in over a longer period of time. In fact, I'm going to use a different filter because I want something with a bit more crunch. So I'm going to use the Synapse AF4 filter, which I really like. I'm going to crank the drive up a little bit. Hopefully that's not messed with the sound too much. I'm going to have that filter in. So we're getting these interesting sort of variations cropping up with the drums. Someone said, you seem to navigate a busy rack easily, Adam. Any tips? Actually, this is, to be honest, when I'm working, I tend to just keep everything in one big, ridiculously long column. It's kind of a throwback to when I used to use earlier versions of Reason before Record, so Reasons 1 to 5. I just have everything in one long rack, and that's kind of how I work now. So this is actually surprisingly tidy for me, having everything segmented into individual columns. So I'd recommend doing that. Having everything contained in things like combinators. Something I didn't used to do was label my tracks properly. I cannot impress upon you enough how stupid an idea that is. Label your tracks as you're going. It takes 2 seconds to do and makes your life so much easier when you're actually mixing stuff down or bouncing stems or stuff like that. So at this point, I could go to File, bounce mixer channels and bounce the stems, and everything would be there and it would be perfect. You'd have perfect stems. So do that. Just get into good habits of organization as you go. It's kind of funny because I imagine if you were to go back to some of my earlier live streams, like from 2016 or so, I would be saying the total opposite. Like, just label whatever you want and work however you want. But it gets messy really, really quickly. So I don't recommend doing that anymore. But, you know, different things work for different people. So however works for you. But if you want to keep everything organized, yeah, I'd use things like group channels and keep things in segmented columns and combinators. These are all good organizational tips and techniques. I'm going to get rid of that Nostromo note lane because I'm not using it. In fact, I'm going to get rid of a few of these because I'm not using them and just go with pure automation. Yeah, that's oddly satisfying. Actually turn that hat up a little bit. That's interesting. Now it's triggering the individual notes of each bass note. So I'm just going to mute that channel, and yep. That will make my life easier. And I'm going to give that a sensible name. Wacky bass submix. That's going to be pad filter. I feel like at some point I might add an extra melodic element. I'm gonna have that wacky bass filter in because it's a bit much at the start. In fact, I might add an extra mono delay on that wacky bass just to... I like how I'm now referring to it as the wacky bass. So I'm going to use the DDR1 classic just to add a little reverb on that, delay rather. Yeah, I should bring that extra octave in over time. I don't want that playing at the start. Actually, I'm going to bring in that hat a little earlier than I was expecting. I just think the track needs that extra bit of variation. I might add some extra cymbals later on. I still want the variation on the drums. I'm going to adjust the rate of that. So we get some more variations, that's better. So we're about a minute and a half in. I mean, I reckon I could stretch this to about 3 minutes and I'll be happy with that. But I do think I need an extra melodic element after this measure here. Filter on the Poly 6 as well, so that opens up a bit over time. I mean, I'm not gonna lie, I do find this kind of a fascinating way of working. Instead of sequencing individual notes and elements like that, what I'm doing essentially is I'm just automating the intensity of certain elements, which I find it's not how I'm used to working, and I find it quite fascinating. And it kind of reminds me of working with hardware in a way, like you're just messing around and seeing what pops out. And if it works, excellent. I'm going to increase the intensity of the hats here. I am going to introduce a delay to this pad purely for this section so I can have a bit of a delay wash, and I'm going to drop the drums out, and that'll be interesting. So let's see how that goes. Whoa, no. I need the filter on there and I want that high. I don't want the feedback to be quite that high. Actually, I do still want the pad to play there as well. But I don't want the wacky bass to play there. No, I definitely want a bit more drive. That's exactly what I wanted. Actually, that's not exactly what I wanted. I wanted more of a kind of crusty wash of delay, but actually that's worked really nicely. So I'm going to automate the filter frequency here in the second half. That glitchy percussion to kind of filter out as well. And then I'm going to bring in an extra melodic element and then bring the track back up and then finish it off. That's my plan. These fifths are giving the track lush 90s energy. Excellent. Like I said, I always kind of feel like using players always end up with stuff that sounds like either early noughties IDM or sort of late 90s, early noughties, which I'm okay with. In fact, I think after... So, I think after that point, I want everything to just drop out. There we go. So it's just a little breathe. I'm going to call that Melody Matrix. That sounds fun. So I've just added a little extra automation there for the drum variation because I wanted it to kind of return to normality after kind of breaking apart a bit here. I've had an interesting idea with the glitchy percussion. So I've got this little reverb unit here. Let's put that to use. So, have that kind of wash up. And increase the reverb time as well. So it kind of feels like it's building up to something. In fact, I might just have the glitchy percussion stop there. Let's not do that. So if I turn that quad note generator off, that will stop the glitchy percussion. So let's do glitchy perc quad, and that's glitchy perc reverb. So what I've done here is I'm basically just using a delay unit on the pad and a reverb unit on that glitchy percussion to kind of give a sense of like a transition. So by increasing the reverb on the glitchy percussion, increasing the time, you get this wash along with this kind of lingering echo. So it's kind of a nice transitional element that makes it sound like the track is progressing from one moment to another. So I've got an idea of something else I want to introduce, but I'm just going to listen to it from the start and have a think about it. No, I'm going to stick with how the track's progressing for now, and I'm going to bring the kick back in. Wacky bass. I'm going to call that pad delay. I'm going to have the wacky bass kind of filter back in. So I'm going to adjust the master vary on the quad as well, so that it kind of opens up as this measure progresses. progresses. So I'm going to stop the glitchy percussion here as well. Wait, that's... Oops. So I'm going to call that hat sequencer. And that's not what I meant to use, which is why I thought I'd give it a name, because I forgot what it was. And have the glitchy percussion drop out there. Ooh, that's kind of interesting. It feels a little more subdued. Oh, that's kind of cool. Yeah, I think I'm going to stick with that. So I'm just going to have this part play out once or twice more with everything going, and I'm going to introduce a extra, oh, pardon me, going to introduce an extra melodic bit just to play over the top and play play some extra percussion, so some extra cymbals or something like that. So yeah, so I have the hats come back. So that's an A1. Just have like a ride cymbal play over the top. So that'll do. I don't want it to be too obvious, so I'm going to, again, turn the probability down there, and I've turned the volume down a bit, so I'm going to totally cop out here, I think, and I'm going to introduce a... I was going to introduce a radical piano, but I'm thinking maybe... No, I'm going to go with that. I'm going to go with that. Pardon me. Good lord. That beer's going through me. Damn, I need to set the noise gate higher next time so you can't capture me belching during the stream. Right. So... Well, that's great and all, but I think we need a lot more reverb to make that sit in the mix, and a lot of delay. So I'm just going to have like a big piano-y wash playing over the top. So, go with the echo. In fact, I want the echo before the reverb. In fact, here's a nifty trick, which I didn't know until relatively recently. If you hold down the shift key while you drag rack devices around, it reconnects them in order of where they're dropped. So if I put that back, if I hold down shift now and move the echo device above the reverb, it will reconnect it so that the echo comes before the reverb. Otherwise, you have to reconnect them manually, which is an incredibly useful feature, and I kind of feel like there should be a bigger deal made about that because it's super useful. And I was unaware of it until relatively recently, and I feel like a total idiot for not knowing that. So Right, so let's have a bit more feedback. Let's... I'm not entirely convinced this is going to fit, but I'm just going to play it and play some bits over the top. Something I'm going to do is just turn that piano up because I can barely hear it. Right. I think we need more of a wash of sound here. So... Right, I think I'm just gonna hook up a matrix and see how it turns out. So let's have an F. So I'm just gonna and turn the resolution down. In fact, let's do that. Ooh. Let's not do that. Yeah, I think that'll work. Not quite. Cool. That'll be a nice little pattern there. So what I might do is trigger that piano there and just have that kind of filter in as that builds. Ooh. think I need like some sort of string kind of wash. Yeah, I think what I'm going to do is put some kind of string wash in there, and then I'm going to start finishing the track after that section. I feel like it's kind of run its course here. Not sold on using a piano though. I kind of feel like I want something more interesting. So I'm going to hit up my handy little patch library, and let's have let's have that patch. I quite like that one. Yeah, that's better. I think. End keys now, end keys matrix, and I'm probably going to use something quite similar here. I'm going to use a pad of some kind, and this particular patch here, now it's probably not the time for me to be promoting my own stuff, but this is from a sound bank that I released a couple of years ago called Europa Relay, and there's a bunch of keys and pads and stuff that sound in a similar sort of vein to that. So there's that. So Never Sleep. That sounds interesting. Ooh, Antidote. Ooh, no, I think I'm gonna stick with the Europa patch. So if I go to By Device and Europa, and Slightly Serene. Let's try Static. I'm kind of approaching the point where I just want to finish this now. It's normally a wall I hit when it comes to working on stuff, where I just kind of want to get it wrapped up and finish, and I feel like I'm approaching that point. It feels like the right time. So I'm gonna have a few big string washes here, I think. All right. So I'm just going to keep that pattern nice and simple, I think. So I'm going to grab that. Actually, no, I'm just going to create a matrix here. And so what was I playing? It was A sharp. So just have that. I'm just gonna solo this. Actually, no, I'm not. So yeah, that'll do nicely. Cool. Right. So just simple 3 notes. Let's go with that. Lots and lots of reverb. Ooh. So what's this matrix? Yeah, that's string matrix. I'm going to call this string pad. And I'm just going to bring that in at the end of the track. And then I'm going to start filtering stuff out and finishing this track because I feel like it's sort of run its course now. Oops, didn't want to do that. So if I delete that track, save it so I don't lose it. Just going to play it from the start and see how it goes. The bass drone there, I think, just to give it a little moment of tension. So I'm just going to mute that there. that's working kind of nicely. So, yes. So after that point, I think I'm just going to let the strings ring out. I'm going to keep the end keys going for that measure there and filter those out and start reducing the intensity of the drums while I'm at it. So there we go. So now I'm also going to start rolling off the snare. And, oh, no, not the kick mirror, the snare. And the kick mirror as well. And the hats, oops. Keep the hats going down. In fact, everything's just going to come down besides the... Actually, yeah, I think the kick will come down a bit, but I don't think I want that to go out just yet. So the percussion density can come down, and the perc mirror velocity can come down as well. I want the bass to open up there. Trying to do. Whoops. So I want that final string note to really wash over everything, so I'm going to increase the time on the reverb, just to kind of wash over there. So I'm just going to have the glitchy percussion stop there as well. And have all that stuff from the beginning so the drums just stop. And of course everything immediately starts playing at the end, so I'm just going to drag that out. Someone said, haven't really learned how to work with automation, so saying this is really useful. Automation is sort of like CV, but not really. Yeah, so this entire track is just pure automation. So I think I want the pad to stop there. So I'm just going to have the melody matrix cut off there. So that's there. something is still playing. Oh yeah, the end keys are still playing. They shouldn't still be playing. There we go. So I'm just going to have the glitchy keys stop at the end. I just realised that's been playing throughout this entire track. Someone said it's like virtual hands playing the players and the synths. Kinda, yeah. It's really interesting. It's basically, I have provided a set of instructions as to what I want it to play, and then I'm kind of just letting it do its own thing. And it's kind of fascinating to work like that. Again, it's not how I typically work. This is very much an extreme example. I'm also going to automate that pumping at the end because I don't really need it. I certainly don't need that note lane. And that's that. I think I'm done with that. Cool. I think I'm gonna have a first for one of these sessions as well. Actually, what's that? Is that bass drone submix? Must name everything. So I'm gonna have a first here and give it a name. Glitchy keys bump. Glitchy keys quad. Righty. Okay, yes, I'm going to give it a name. No surprises for what I'm going to call this. I'm going to call it Quarantine. So, there we go. That's Quarantine. I'm just going to play the track in a second from start to finish. And, oh, that's not got a name either. What is it? String pad. Right, string pad reverb. Naughty. Right, so now it's got a name, and I'm just gonna let it play out and hopefully have a good think about what I've done. And there we go. I'm happy with that. I did make a slight tweak, which is with the glitchy percussion reverb at the end. I thought it stopped quite suddenly, so I'm just going to play that little measure again there and have a little listen. I was automating the wrong thing. Like a chump. Right. That's better. It's less of a abrupt cut-off with the glitchy percussion. That was pretty much the main thing I wanted to change. And I think that's pretty much it. I'm happy with how far I've taken that. There are certainly things I would change about that if I were working on something else. In fact, someone's mentioned, is there anything missing in Reason that other DAWs have that you'd like to see added, or does a lack of options help your writing process? Any thoughts of using a different DAW now that Reason Rack plugin is an option? To be perfectly honest, I've used Reason Rack plugin in other DAWs, and I really enjoy it. I mentioned using the Reason Rack plugin in Ableton Live as a means to use Live's non-linear songwriting and arrangement using the session view, which is fantastic, but I can't see myself using it on a day-to-day basis. I'm very much a Reason standalone kind of person when it comes to day-to-day use, and I use it all the time when I'm writing music standalone. I don't think there's really anything missing at this point, besides the one main thing I think is missing is different MIDI channels per VST, so specify MIDI channels for VST inputs. So you have multi-timbral VSTs like orchestral VSTs and contact instruments and that kind of thing, and you're stuck using channel 1, which is a bit of a bummer, especially if you're using an external synth or something like that. Like, you can use external synths using the external MIDI instrument, but one particular instance here is I've got a Virus Snow, and I'm using the plugin to control it. It comes back to that whole I like things to be as seamless as possible in software, even when I'm using hardware thing. And I can't specify which MIDI channel I'm sequencing using Reason's sequencer, which is a bit annoying. So I have to use a workaround. I have to use Element to get around that, which basically it's a VST that can host other VSTs, and you can specify which MIDI channel you're using via that by using an external MIDI instrument in Reason and specifying a channel and using loopback channels. And it's a ridiculous workaround for something that should be incredibly simple. So yeah, there's that. Someone said key command to bounce in place. I don't know, actually. If there is one, then please let me know. I should probably check the manual because I use it all the time. Someone's also mentioned me zooming in and out when I'm using automation. G and H are the zoom in and out keys, and I use them all the time. I think they're the same in Cubase. They're different in Studio One, but it's kind of a standard thing in most DAWs, I think. Someone's asked, do you transfer to another app for mixing or mastering? I think I mentioned this before this stream started, but I tend to, if I'm mixing an entire project like an album or something long form like that, I tend to use Studio One, but not always. And that's because it has a fantastic project view, which it's designed specifically for mastering entire projects, and it's fantastic for that as a result. So yeah, it's great. But even then, sometimes I tend to master as I go, which is, I'm sure, is frowned upon. But if I'm working on a production album, I'll just stick everything through a particular chain of effects, and if it sounds right at the end of it, I'll hand that over, and more times than not, the client's been happy with the result. So, but for instance, with the last album I released, Unforgotten, and Mesmerer, and my solo releases, I tend to master them with Studio One, but even then it's basically a case of applying a limiter to the end, or a touch of EQ and a little bit of compression. I don't tend to do a lot of mastering myself. So that's that. Someone said the only thing in Reason I'm probably not going to touch much is the sequencer window. Well, I mean, if today is anything to go by, you might not have to control it a lot. So one thing I did with a project like this was I have a Behringer BCR 2000, which is basically a MIDI controller that's just a bank of knobs. And I assigned each individual knob to various controls in Reason like in a rack like this, so there were no sequencer lanes. And I basically just recorded a live take like I was recording hardware, essentially. And it was really great. The thing about doing jams like that is they always tend to be longer form, I find, because you tend to give the arrangement more space to breathe. It just kind of happens more naturally. So I ended up with this more long form arrangement than I would have ended up with normally. And I was really happy with how it turned out. So one of these days I might do something with those tracks. They're kind of a sort of experimental messing around with beat map, kind of like what I've done today, but I think with a bit more sort of grounding. I think today I just kind of went a bit nuts and started introducing matrices when I could have quite easily just used the sequencer for that kind of stuff. So to be honest, like some of these sequences I feel like I did just use because I wanted to keep everything in the rack. It was a bit of a, I've come this far, I might as well keep it all in the rack kind of thing. But there's nothing to say that you could have just sequenced those parts, and I just wanted the bragging rights basically. So someone's asked, what's your mastering chain? I mean, right here it's a limiter, but generally speaking, so on Unforgotten I used an electron analog heat to add some saturation and a bit of nice kind of, I don't want to, it's going to sound cliched, but analog warmth to the recordings. And then I processed that further using Elevate and a little bit of SSL compression, but not much. So the bulk of the processing was done through the analog heat, which kind of, it just glued everything together, and I was really happy with how that turned out. So yeah, it's a fantastic box, and I'm really, really happy I picked it up. So I'm going to wrap up this music making session, and I'm going to maybe field some questions and that kind of thing afterwards. So I'd just like to say thank you so much for joining me for this wacky, semi-generative, entirely rack-focused songwriting session. It's been interesting. I think next time maybe I'll kind of mix the two up. Maybe mix a bit of sequencing in with the crazy players and that kind of stuff. But it's always fun to kind of just essentially control the flow of the song using automation alone. It's an interesting way of working, and if you've never tried it, I highly recommend it. So I'm going to wrap up the song making session here and answer some questions afterwards. So if you're watching this on YouTube, thanks so much for watching, and I hope you stick around for some future music making sessions and what have you. And thanks so much for joining me. Cheers. Bye bye.